All right, folks, I am looking at page 21. On the left is the grand staff. I'm not going to go over that now, but if that doesn't make sense to you, reread it, flip back to some of the examples, for example, page 16, 17, where you see single lines for one hand. The reason for the double staff is two hands. Believe it or not, in really advanced music, you can have three or four. Now, what would the purpose be for that? Because you only have two hands. If there's some high notes and low notes where you're going back and forth like that. I played something like that, a big Rachmaninoff piece when I was younger, and both hands would be high and then jump both hands low. That was hard to read. I had to learn that and memorize that. But just kind of so you know what's out there. Rock along, what I noticed first about this is that there's repeated notes and skips. There's no steps. And what's a step? White notes, they're next to each other, they touch. If one note is skipped over or more, can be two notes or more, we call it a skip. This song has no steps. That's just kind of like a little different because everything you've been doing has had steps. Now, what else is new here? I see that one hand plays at a time. Even though you have two lines indicating the two hands, we're starting off, one hand's gonna rest. You start getting used to the bigger staff, whereas you're not doing both hands doing different things. And there's the rest. That's the whole rest. If you look over to page 20, you will see that explained. It fills a whole measure with rest. We call it silence. It's kind of like a rectangle that hangs down from the fourth line, and we count up from the bottom. We will see half rest. I'm trying to think, did we get that? I don't think we did. I don't want to get all distracted. A half rest is also a rectangle, but it sits on the third line. They look very similar. It's easy to mix them up, but if it's hanging from the fourth line, it's a whole rest. All right, I am going to play this just slowly all the way through. Getting ready, getting set up. Both my hands are ready, even though the left hand's going to rest. Okay, that's a moderate speed. You could go faster. Once you get used to it, you probably do want to go a little faster. You don't want to go so fast, though, that you stumble. That's not going to enhance your learning. At the end of line 1, there is a single bar line. There's not the double. That means you keep going. Now, if you're practicing, you can stop there. If you're practicing, you can really stop anywhere to work on a section. But when you actually play, those two lines are part of one thing. Bottom of the page, Mexican Hat Dance, there is again a whole rest in one hand at a time, a whole line of whole rests. They introduce quarter rests. They're this little squiggly thing. There is pink text there. It first appears in measure 1. It says this sign, and there's a picture of it, is a quarter rest, rest for one count. For a one count rest, I would definitely keep my hand in place. If it's a whole line, I might just play one hand and just kind of put my other hand in the lap. If it's one beat rest, you're just going to stay in place. In this case, now, pay attention to this. The left hand starts. How do we know it's left hand? It's the bass clef. It's the bottom line. And for our class, the bass clef is always going to be the left hand and the bottom line. It is possible for the bottom line to be a treble clef, but you won't ever have that in this class. So I'm all in place. I'm getting ready for some different rhythms here. There's a half note, a quarter rest. And I just realized I didn't turn this over. If I ever forget to flip this over, feel free just to turn the volume on and yell at me. I try to remember. All right, try to make it so you can see some of this. I guess this is better. I just don't want it to fall off. Alrighty, sorry about that. You'll see it in the overhead, and we already did that anyway. Now, page 22, 23, these are writing pages, thinking pages. I'm going to hold my book here. I don't know how well that's going to, I think that'll show up at least well enough for you to see what I'm talking about. It's pretty awkward holding it up from here to get over there, but I'm looking at page 22. Hopefully you've all got books by now. If not, see if you can get that soon. Writing in 4/4 time. Well, why would you want to write in 4/4 time? Why would you want to write anyway? If you're new to music, that might not make sense. Let's say you're just taking piano lessons and you don't really understand why your teacher would want you to write. One reason is it helps you learn better. Another reason, especially if there's a lot of music industry in this class, you may be taking this as part of your program, which includes getting to things like music theory and composing, or perhaps listening to songs you want to figure out and trying to write some of that down. Initially, I think the biggest benefit is when you actually try to write. I think the way it works with your brain, it just helps you remember what it is you're looking at a little better. So this is a chart. It's a giant pink box chart. Quarter, half, and whole. The chart is very obvious, but I'm just going to point out there's the note, then the counts, and then the total number of counts. Well, what does that mean? If I'm going to look at the half note, the middle box, the middle column says count. We would count that 1, 2, because it gets 2 beats. If we were counting the music, counting out loud or counting in our head, the total number of counts is 2. A whole note, the total is 4, but if we were counting, we would count 1, 2, 3, 4. I think that's pretty obvious. It explains again about 4/4. The top number tells us how many counts or beats in a measure. And once again, what's a measure? It's that space between those vertical bar lines. At this point, they're all 4. Pretty soon we'll have 3. I'm getting hotter now. When I came down, it seemed like I was upstairs and it was warmer. Okay, so there is fill in the blank kind of stuff here. They give you a note, they ask you to fill it in. If you're new to this, I think this is beneficial. If you're not new to this, if this is just busy work, I don't really think there's any point. There's kind of like a little game. They put notes in, they leave something out. You have to figure out what kind of a note goes in based on the beats. It's like math, except notes instead of numbers. Like if I divided an apple into quarters, that would be 4 quarters and a whole. If I took one away, it would be 3 quarters. It's kind of something like that. It's a game made out of the music notes. Once again, if you're new, that has value. Page 23 is a writing page, a thinking page, and a theory page. There is something beneficial here to doing it, even if you kind of can do it, and that's that you have 2 little songs. You've got Lightly Row. I will play this. There's a little melody here in the right-hand first line. They're asking you to put bar lines in and draw in the rest. If you do that, it will become complete. But then when you're done, you're going to want to play this. Then the left hand would take over. So there's all this blank space where you would come along. The counts are 1, 2, 3, 4. You would draw a line. 1, 2, 3, 4. You would draw a line. That's how you'd fill out the bar lines, and you would model this measure, drawing in a little rest in the middle of each measure. These little boxes are to write the notes in. Once again, if you're new, that's going to be beneficial. The last example is the same kind of an exercise in writing bar lines and letter names. I'm just going to play it for you so that after you write that in, if you want to try it, here we go. Both hands are ready, but right hand's going to start. So it's an all-around exercise that ends with you playing something. Now, this is pretty new. Assuming you haven't done anything to this point, page 24, I'm just going to hold this here. This is intervals. An interval is the distance between two notes. Like C to E, that's C, D, E, that's a third. You can think of intervals on the page, how they look, or on the piano, how they look. For example, when I said step or skip, a step is a second. If I go C to D, I'll play it over here. You might see it a little closer. C to D, that's a step. We can call that a second. If I go C, D, E, it's a skip. That's like a generic term, but the more specific term is that's a third. We count the first and the last. 1, 2, 3. That's called a third. You can play the third one note at a time or together, and we're actually going to see both of those. So starting here, we're talking about melodic intervals. That's like a melody. The notes come one after the other. As soon as we finish this, we're going to look at harmonic. That's like a harmony. They come at the same time, not one at a time. Your hands are going to go into position, the C position, and at the top of the page, you're going to want to read through that because that sets you up for the exercise. At the top, there's fingering. Now, when you have your book, if you have it now, take a look. If not, the first measure has letters written in the boxes, C, D, C, E. And at the top, there is fingering. So you could actually play it without even reading the letters. However, that's not what you're going to need to do. The next measure, I call it the training wheels. They leave that all out. No letter names, no fingering. However, it's exactly the same. That will be easy simply because it comes right after that. This is just the very beginning of starting to get a little bit independent with some of these notes. Then the songs on the page, they're pretty simple, but they will kind of reinforce the idea of the seconds or the thirds using the same notes. You might need to get a pencil and pencil a few in. Don't use ink because if you make a mistake, it's awkward. And even if you don't make a mistake, if you have like dark marks, later on, if you want to test yourself, you won't be able to. So get a pencil, keep it handy, keep it sharpened. Oh, you know what? Even though we're not at school, let me tell you about this. At school, I always had to tell people, don't ever erase. All right, let me see. This is my pencil. Yes. All right. If you have a pencil, there's an eraser on the end. Do not do this. You see my book? And you see the keys. Don't do this and then brush all that stuff here. That gets between the keys. In an acoustic piano, a little of that maybe is not so bad. When the tuner comes, he can like vacuum some of that out, but you're going to pay extra. In a digital keyboard, that can really cause problem, especially if it builds up. It gets between the contacts, and there are so few digital keyboard repair people that the cost is really high, just getting someone to come out. And for a little keyboard, it is totally not going to be worth spending $175 for a service call for a $150 keyboard. So my point is just, If you need to erase, this is what you want to do. Put it in your lap, erase, brush it onto the floor. If you're really into like OCD clean, get a little trash can there. Just don't let it get into your keyboard. Alrighty. Melodic intervals, going to play it through, then I'm going to go on into the next song. Here we go. Most likely, if you're new, you will do a little bit at a time, and you'll probably go slow. You might do that a couple times until it feels comfortable and natural, then double it. Then that's your 2 measures. Then do that a few times, then go to the left hand. We are going to the middle of the page, Au clair de la lune. There's something right above that they mentioned. There's 2 pink boxes, one for P, one for MF. P stands for piano, just like piano. Piano is actually an Italian word. It means soft. When the piano was developed, it was originally called a pianoforte or a forte piano. They put loud soft together. Now, why would they do that? Because back then, keyboard instruments had pretty much one volume. If it was an organ, everything played at the same volume. There were a few things you could do to change it, but unlike piano, you couldn't just press softer and get a softer note. So this was astounding back then. It just allowed more expression in music. We don't really think about it. If you don't play piano and don't know that, you'd never think about it. Some of your keyboards might not have any volume. If you press soft and hard and it sounds the same, that means you don't have touch sensitivity. You're okay for this course without it. Down the road, if you're interested in working on your skills, you're going to want to upgrade into a keyboard that has that touch sensitivity. Also, some of your keyboards probably don't have a pedal input to plug in a pedal for the floor. This is what a pedal does. Most basically, I'm going to just play one note. It's still holding. The pedal is sustaining it. Sometimes it's called the sustain pedal. Some keyboards have an input called sustain. Some keyboards don't have that, and they have a button that emulates sustain by letting notes ring a little longer. If you have that, you might want to fool around with it. I don't really teach the pedal in this course. Loud and soft, I don't really teach in this course either, simply because for many beginners, it's too much. I'm not going to teach it now. Some of you might not even be able to do it, but I'm going to point it out because if you can do it, if you have an instrument that can do that, that's going to be interesting for you. I would call that a lower priority than correct notes and correct rhythm. That's what you want to focus. Once you get those correct, you can work on the nuances that make it just more nuanced, more beautiful. Whether it's contrast, like loud and dramatic and soft, or whether there's some other element of the nuance. Okay, this song is just a right-hand song. My left hand has a rest the whole measure. I'm just going to put my left hand in my lap. You could put it somewhere else. You could lean. There's a repeat, and this is so short, I'm going to repeat it. What they've put here is actually the first line of a song that plays again. Exactly. Then there's a different section and it comes back to that line, but we don't have that. We just have this one line. It's just an exercise getting started. You're going to notice some notes repeat. Look for that. When you look at the next note, ask yourself, is it the same or different? If it's the same, play it again. Does it go up? Does it go down? Does it go up by step? Then that's going to be the next note. Does it skip? Now, here's something else interesting. The The next page is the theory page, is going to talk about that. If a note is a third, or I didn't really say that right. If an interval is a third, if the two notes create a third, they're going to be either on two lines, the closest two lines, or two spaces. You're going to need to read over that. You'll see images, explanation. That's because the way the staff works, a line to the next space is always a second. A space to the next line is always a second. We haven't even begun to learn some of the intervals, but you'll start to see there's a pattern and you can figure this out. It's like there's a logic to it. And once you get it and get used to it, you will find this gets easier. Let's go to the last one. Usually I find that beginners at this level have a little more trouble with this one. And there's a reason for that, because they're giving the left hand a lot more work than they just gave the right hand. First of all, it's two lines, but that's not why. It's just, especially I think the second line. So I'm going to play the whole thing through, and then I'll explain a few things to watch out for. So it's two lines. There's no double bar at the end of the first one. Here's my left hand in place. My right hand, I'm just resting. I think the two hardest spots, and they're not really hard, but they're more likely to trip you up in the beginning, is first line, measure 3, and second line, the first two measures, which are identical. So let's look at measures 1 and 2. They're identical, and then how they compare with 3. This is measure 1. It's a long note, then it skips down and walks up. Then you repeat that. In measure 3, it's almost the same, but instead of holding the E half note, you play it twice. So just watch out for that. Take it step by step. Line 2. Whenever I teach this in the class, the only thing I play people initially is this. 2-finger on F, and you're going to notice they're not giving you all the letters now. You're possibly going to have to look up to the top to remember what that letter is. In line 2, that first note letter is an F, but they don't tell you that. But your hand's in that position. If you put a 2 down where it is, it will play an F, but you really do have to learn that's an F. So you're going to play 1, 2, 3 Fs and then skip. Then you'll do that again. You'll put it together 2 times. Next, we have what I call a walk down. So the nice thing is, as you learn these little songs, you're also doing some exercise for your hands. So it's your basic technique. Page 25, it's one of those thinking pages, theory pages. They have graphic images explaining how to recognize a second or a third on paper in notation. We would say this is notation, so we would say how to recognize it in music notation. Or I like to say on paper, because for beginners, we separate it from on the keyboard. On the keyboard, we know it's a second because the white notes touch. That's where we are now in the beginning stages. Down the road, we can have black notes in there too, which you need to know more to understand that. For now, we're just doing white notes, keeps it easy. Alrighty, there's a whole bunch of exercises there. I would say most likely most of you should go through this. Even if you've had some music, you might not have had this unless you've had a lot of theory. Moving on, we're on page 26. Harmonic intervals. They're like a harmony. If you have your book in front of you, and I'm going to hold this up here, a harmonic second has a really weird look. And I'm going to pop over here and show you now. So if you're just watching, You're not just like full of mystery and confusion. All right. I don't know if is that clear enough to see what I'm pointing to? This is a second. One note goes to the left, one goes to the right. I'll move it around. I can't tell. My image is so tiny, I can't tell if you can see that. The third they stack on top, and then the stem joins them. Because they come together, they share a stem. If you can't see what I'm doing now, and if you don't have your book, just pay attention when you get there. Now, why is that? Why does the second have that funny look? Now, it might not even seem funny to you yet because you haven't had a lot of this, but it is funny because all the other intervals don't do that. Now, the reason they do that has nothing to do with music. It has to do with printing and ink. If they line them up on top, they would overlap and they would just blur together. Especially like a quarter note, it would just be a big blob. They separate them so you can see what it is. But here's what's kind of cool. After you recognize that and see it a few different places, you will always know what a second looks. You can always tell where the second is because it has that unique look. All right, I'm going to go through this page and then I'm going to do one more page, 26 and 27, and that's where we're going to stop today. Okay, our harmonic intervals, of course, please read everything. They come together at the same time. For some of you, that might be a little hard, but if you keep doing it, it will get easier. Just like I said in the beginning, for some people, it's going to be hard to play three notes. That's not a surprise. It might take a while till that's comfortable. Playing two is definitely easier, but even then it might feel weird. This will get easier though, and then playing three gets easier. When you really can play like here, 1, 2, this is 5 notes, this is 6 notes, my thumb is turning and playing 2, my pinky can turn on the side. I actually could play more, but this is a real chord from a real song. It's part of a Chopin, is it a waltz? It's a part of a Polonaise. I haven't played that in decades, but that's a real thing we can do. So 5 fingers can play 7 notes. For now, all you have to worry about is 2 or 3. Here we go. I'm going into C position, and once again, you can raise your right hand if that's more comfortable. I'll do it for this example. They're both ready. 2 and the 3. Next measure is not marked with helpers, but it's the same thing. I did the repeat because I was talking the first time. Next example uses some of those little intervals to create, we can say it's kind of harmony. It's very sparse. It's not a lot of harmony. It creates a little energy because there's a little rhythmic movement. I'm just going to play the whole thing through. Rest. Okay, so that's taking the harmonic intervals and it's applying it in a little basic piece. Often we call these, I call them songs. Technically, it's a piece if there's not singing. There's words there, so I could say it's a song. I do call them songs because when I think of a musical piece, I think of a bigger piece. But some piano teachers or musicians can be kind of like a little bit, oh, I don't want it, a little bit snooty about, oh, it's not a song, it's a piece, which maybe technically it's correct in some cases. So I'll be calling them your songs as a rule, but it's a little piece for piano. Last project for today. Now, I would suggest that you don't try this right away unless these are easy. And why would that be? Because there are some different seconds and thirds in here. You might miss that. They're different. They're seconds, but they're not the same seconds. So you do have to pay attention. You have to look carefully. Once again, take your pencil and you might want to, like in this first example on page 27, that's a C and a D. You're probably going to get that because we just did that over here on 26. But if we go to measure 3, it's an F and a G. It's still a second, but it's not the same second. The fingering will probably help you, but I feel that if you do a little just gently writing in a few notes, if it helps you in pencil, that might help. What you want to do is if you're making mistakes and making the same mistake, you need to find a way to stop that. So you might circle a note or pencil something in to help you. Here we go. My hands are in position. Let me point out that between measure 1, which is right hand, and measure 2, which is left hand, there's some different seconds. However, something is the same. CD to CE, and then in the left hand, CD to CE. It's lower, so it's kind of like an echo. Normally an echo might be more like, but this is kind of like a little bit of an echo lower. In music, that kind of imitation is often referred to as an echo, even if it's like a different, like maybe it's a flute and a violin or a bassoon and then a clarinet, like because it echoes, it mimics. Bottom of the page, exact same intervals, except a little repetition with rhythm. That's it, folks.